So it's not every day we get a car like this to paint, and I thought with this being Candy Red it'd be a really nice one to show you guys. So as for the car itself, we're just going to take a quick little bit of a walk around it and figure out just why it is that we're actually painting this car. So you can see it really obviously this is very two different shades, and unfortunately this whole car was like a patchwork quilt from start to finish. It's got more shades of orange and red on it than I've ever seen in my life, and obviously being what is a very pricey desirable car, it makes the whole car look horrendous. So the customer got in touch with me. He's asked us to take a look at this car. We are going to do a full respray on it, and also change a load of the parts to a gloss black as well, because you can see just here from the boot and the spoiler just how bad the colour match is from the spoiler to the quarter panel. And not only that, but whoever has painted this in the past hasn't replicated the same finish all over the car. So one panel is like a mirror finish, another one's really peely. Someone's painted the centre of the roof at some point, so the centre of the roof is like bright orange compared to the rest of it being red. And I mean, the front bumper looks almost like it's lipstick, it's that bright red on this car. But in fact, the actual colour for this car should be that red. It shouldn't be the orangey colour that's showing up on the wings and the bonnet and a lot of the rest of the car. It was really far off as far as colour wise goes. So skip to 3 days after we got the car, and it's now all stripped, all been sanded and all prepped in the booth. Now this has all been prepped up to an 800 grade, which is a lot higher than I usually go, but for any of you guys that know anything about candy, prep is ultimate key as far as candy goes. Now you can see we've got a lot of parts in the booth, and I've also got a friend of mine, Kerry, who's come over to give me a hand with this car, because soon I'm going over to his shop to help him paint an American truck in Apple Candy Red. And not having any experience in candy, he wanted to come over and get a little bit of experience as far as the candy side goes, so that when we hit the American truck over at his shop, it'd make our life a lot easier. Now we've got pretty much every part that needs to go red in the booth all at once, or at least all the major joining parts of the car, like the bumpers and the side spoilers and things like that, because the issue with candy is if you can't replicate the exact same amount of coats with the exact same laydown all the way through, then you're going to end up with major issues as far as, say, painting the shell and then painting the bumper separately. And putting them in the booth, you're going to end up with real problems. Things just won't match up, and I don't want this car to end up looking like a patchwork quilt like it was before, because as soon as I actually went over to view this car, like literally as soon as you walked through the door, it was horrendous just how bad all these different colours were. Now the car itself didn't actually have any damage to it. It's had a lot of dodgy repairs in its life, unfortunately. So we've gone through all the car when we stripped it out, and completely stripped the car right out in order to do this and make it a seamless paint job, and just try and make this as nice as possible, because obviously this is close to an £100,000 car, so it's not a cheap car. So it's not the sort of thing that, as far as we go, we're not going to cut any corners on this car. We want it to be spotless. Now the roof has already been done out in a gloss black, and then we're going to prep all the car up, and I would say that I probably spent a full day as far as masking and cleaning the booth and everything goes before I even got to this stage. So I actually worked on this car, stripping it on the Tuesday, the Wednesday, the Thursday. On the Friday I spent the whole day on the booth and masking the car, and then on the Saturday, unfortunately I was very ill on the Saturday, which is why I've had to turn down the actual video volume right off, because unfortunately I was very full of the flu. But on the Saturday the two of us came in and tag teamed this car and had a nice slow day, took a time so we could get that faultless finish at the end of it. So as far as the actual video for this goes, in this part 1 video we are going to go through having a chat about putting the base coat, the ground coat down, and then we're going to do the first layer of candy, and then in part 2 we're going to finish off the candy and then do the clear coat, and I will have the reveal pictures of the car when it's all finished. Now as I said, one of the biggest things with candy is the prep, but also making sure that everything on the paint side is done faultless start to finish. So for this, for the ground coat, it's kind of like a silvery bronze colour. A lot of candies use like a coarse silver or a gold or something like that, or a coppery colour, and this is kind of in between all three really. It's quite a distinctive ground coat colour. So we've actually picked to do this in solvent rather than waters to try and help speed the job up, and previously I have done a spray out card and matched a spray out card after a few attempts with different layers and levels of candy to the interior of the car to make sure that when we respray the exterior that we're going to make sure that the interior and the exterior then match the shades that it should, rather than being obviously 3, 4, 5 different shades like it is at the moment. So for this I'm going to be using my Sagola 4600 DVR Aqua. Yes, I am using solvent base in it, and it is a very capable gun as far as solvent base coat goes. It's got a really nice fan, it's got a really nice lay down, so for a job like this where I want this ground coat to be absolutely spotless, this is an ideal gun to use. Now as far as settings go, I was probably only around about 20 to 25 psi and a couple of turns out on the fluid, because I don't want to be laying this too heavy over areas like this that have had wet and wet on it. There are some areas that we've wet and wetted where there was rub throughs, because all we literally did, I went over the full car with a P400 and then I went over the whole car again with a P800. I then primed any areas that I'd had to block to make sure that they were nice and straight again. Obviously with a lot of this car being a mixture of plastic and aluminium, it's one of those sort of kind of awkward cars in that respect to work on. So you want to make sure that everything's nice and straight and flat, and I want this to look like a $100,000 car when it's finished. I don't want it to look, you know, multiple shades of different colours. I mean, we actually physically scanned this car with our Lessenol system, and out of 5 panels I scanned, I got 1 paint match and it was not the right colour. And I will leave a link to the colour code for this car in the description. So with candy, the one thing that we want to make sure is that everything that we paint has got the same coverage. So for the ground coat, the most important part of this is making sure that the ground coat is one, absolutely spotless, so we want no prep marks showing through this ground coat, and we don't want any edges whatsoever that we've missed on this ground coat, which is why I'm taking my time to start off with, going around all the little tight edges, making sure that all the little nooks and crannies have got a good coat of paint before then I go over the outside of the panels, because any tiny imperfection or any missed coverage as far as this ground coat goes when the car is finished is going to show up in the final finish and in the final colour. So we have also doing a few things that you don't often see me do. With this being a candy, we've also got a Collad colour check light out in the spray booth when we get round to the later stages of the ground coat to make sure that we've got full coverage everywhere, and we'll also do that when we come to check the candy over as well. We'll get the colour check light out, we'll go around all the little edges and all the little nooks and crannies with the colour check light to make sure that everything is fully covered. So for this first coat, we're not exactly going light, but I'm not going mega wet. It was quite an okay covering colour as far as the ground coat goes. We gave it 3 coats of the ground coat to make sure that it was really nice. I put the first one down, Kerry went ahead and put the second one down, and then I went across with the finishing coat, and then between us we both checked around the car with the colour check light to make sure all the ground coat was fully covered and that we'd caught all the edges. And we went round and denibbed any, what I would say would be problem areas as far as nibs go, because if you get any nibs in this ground coat part of the stage, then it is going to show up when you put the candy over the top, and obviously then that's going to cause major issues in the final finish on the car. And like I said, you know, it's a big money car, but it's also, you know, it's not one of them cars that you paint very often. I mean, this is personally my first McLaren that I've repainted or I've done any work on, but I'm quite used to over the years. I've done a lot of high-end Mercs, Bentleys and Porsches and all sorts over the years, but it was nice to get, you know, it's not my cup of tea, this car, but it was a very nice car to paint, especially when condition wise and colour wise it was so bad when it came in. To actually be asked to be the guy that can put it back right, and put all your time and effort making sure that this car is absolutely spotless. It's a real nice car to work on, and I love jobs like this. One of the lads that actually works with me, he was actually laughing because the whole time this was in, I pretty much didn't take my hands off this car the whole time it was in. I just got straight on with stripping it, every nut and bolt, boxing everything up really meticulously, and then got onto the prep stage, and literally just one panel at a time, every single panel, going around prepping everything, making sure everything was spotless before I moved on to the next panel, and so on and so on and so on. And at the same time, this is why the owner of this car was actually recommended to bring it to me. Someone that we know, he'd asked if he knew any good sprayers that were around, and he'd come not a massive different distance, but quite a distance to bring it to us. There's plenty of paint shops between where he's based and where we're based, but the customer of ours that he'd spoken to did say that I have got quite a reputation for not letting a car leave the shop unless it is absolutely spotless and unless the car is right. And obviously a car like this really does need that extra level of attention to detail. Now, I'm not saying that you would put more level of detail into this than you would any other job that you do in your shop, but just because of the colour, this needs a whole different mindset as far as the prep goes that the colour needs, the spraying, absolutely everything. It's another reason why, although this was ready to paint on the Friday, I didn't paint it on the Friday. I went home, got some food, had a bath, chilled out for the night, because I was feeling absolutely rotten that week. So the last thing that I wanted to do was to be rushing around, spraying this last thing on the Friday night, so I can go in on the Saturday with a nice clear head, with a good night's sleep, chill out for the day, take my time. I've got plenty of time for flash off times. I've got no rushing with it. I can just chill out for the day, do my thing, and just enjoy spraying this car, because it was a really, really nice car to spray. And I have to say, although supercars and things like that aren't really my thing, I am very much a bike man. This car did grow on me the more I kind of like got it polished up and got it rebuilt and got it all put back together. I think the colour turned out absolutely stunning on this car when it was finished, and all the black accents that we added, and other bits that we changed over to black as well, did actually, for me, really make this car like a completely different car. So as much as I hate to admit it, it ended up a really, really nice looking car as far as just a car goes. But for me, it's just the love of painting. To get on a job like this, I can really let my level of detail and my OCD go on a job like this and really go to town on it. And even on the polishing side, I flat and polished every inch of this car from top to bottom, inside and out, so it's got an absolute mirror finish front to back. And a lot of it, to be fair, it was that nice off the gun, we didn't really need to polish it. A lot of the trims and a lot of the bits like the mirrors and the spoiler and the boot and stuff like that, it really didn't need a polish, but that extra level of detail is what will really make this car look absolutely spotless when it's finished. And for me, that's what it's all about. Whether it be a McLaren or a Bentley or the Mustang that we did, whenever we get a car in like this, we were always pushing to put the quality better than we did on the last job. Now, this is obviously a view that you don't often get, and this is Kerry just going about the second coat of the ground coat. As I said, after the second coat, we went across and denibbed all this, and then I went and put the third coat, the third and final coat, a nice wet even coat to make sure all the ground coat was fully covered, and then it had a real nice even metallic lay down as well, so that when the candy went over it, everything would be really nice, even, and everything would pop. So as I say, once Kerry had finished this second coat here, then we went across using P800 softback sanding sponges and just denibbed any little problem areas. Then I went across and gave it the third coat, and this is it in its third coat now. And all we're going to do is we're going to be using the Colad Colour Check Light. We're just going around the undersides of these doors, because these undersides of these doors are quite a pain. They are very, very low, and it's not the sort of car that I really want to jack up in the air while I was spraying it, so I left it on the ground. And then we've just got the Colour Check Light round a few little areas, just making sure that everything has full coverage. We're checking all around like the window edges, around the roof edges, inside the boot shuts, inside where the vents are, underneath the arches, absolutely every edge that we could possibly check, and making sure that we're 110% happy with it before we go ahead and start putting the candy on. Because if we start putting the candy on and there isn't any issues in this ground coat, then it's too late. We're going to end up with problems straight away. So it's best to go around, make sure all these little bits, and there's a few little bits here again that we just caught after the third coat and denibbed, that we're just putting an extra bit of colour on, like on this front wing here. There's a little bit that I denibbed on the front wing, just to make sure it is absolutely spotless. Then we've gone around and tapped the car off once this coat had dried off, and then we tapped the car off again before we went and mixed the candy up. So again, for the candy, I'm using my Sagola 4600 DVR Aqua. It's a 1.2 XL setup, and at each stage we've sprayed this colour card. So with every single coat we've put on the car, we've put a coat on the colour card so we can check the coverage, and then once the coverage on the colour check card comes up to the coverage that I've got on the pre-sprayed colour check card, then obviously we are good to go. Now, as far as the candy goes, because I've had quite a few questions actually recently on candy. I know on a recent video one guy mentioned something about candy, and I think we might have had a little bit of a chat in the comments or on Instagram, and I did say that we had another candy video coming up soon. So as far as candy goes, I would also pretty much do the same as we did on the ground coat. So I'm going around the edges first, and then we're going to go for a nice wet, and I do want to go for a wet full coverage coat in the middle. Now, although candy does need to be sprayed evenly, as long as you're not putting it on too concentrated or too heavy all at once, it won't be an issue if you go around, say, the edges first and then spray over the middles. It won't leave a dark band around the edges or anything like that. You just need to be extra cautious that you're putting the same amount of paint down on each area as you're going around the car. So for these little edges, nooks and crannies, I'm taking my time. I'm not rushing it. I'm not going full fluid on it. I'm just feathering the trigger, putting as much paint in there as I need and not really overloading it. So you can see on the outside of the car there's not a lot of colour coming up the outside of the car there, because I'm concentrating on where the paint is landing. I want it on these internal edges and on all these hard to reach areas first, because if I catch those now, then I'm not going to forget them later down the line. So we've gone around all those edges now. We're going to do the same here. Just make sure that top edge is caught on that swage line. Go around the window edges and then start painting the panel. And I will do this on every single panel as I move around the car. I'll take my time, nice and slow, nice and meticulous, and then we're going to just go for a really nice even wet coat. Now, I know as you're probably looking at this in the video, this looks a tiny little bit patchy, but this is just the first coat of candy out of 3. By the time this has had 3 layers of candy, then this whole finish is evened out nicely, and we end up with a real good even finish, front to back, top to bottom on this car, and the candy will match perfectly on the bumpers, on the side panels, on absolutely everything. Now, you've got a few options with candy. A lot of people do think that you cannot paint candy panel to panel like I'm doing here. You can, you just need to be a little bit more careful that you don't overlap too far. So if you'll notice, as I'm coming up back across with wet strokes in a moment, I will slightly angle the gun up where I get to the point that the candy has already been laid down, just there, so that I'm not laying too much candy back over the overlap of where I've already painted. So as I get to the end, if you look here, I just turn the gun away that tiny little bit and just feather off the trigger a little bit, so I'm not doubly overlapping the candy on the panel joins or anything like that. The other option is, obviously, you can walk the length of the car. Now, unless you're very experienced or you do a lot of candy, walking the length of the car is probably something that I would recommend against personally, because it is quite difficult when you are going from one end of the car to the other to keep that line really nice and to keep a really good overlap, because that is another key to candy. You know, you don't want to get an uneven overlap when you're laying candy on a car. If you look at this here, I am keeping this wet edge going very strict, very nice and slow and smooth. I'm taking my time, and this is almost like putting a coat of clear coat down. I'm making sure that overlap is absolutely smack on every single time, so I get the same amount of candy on the bottom of the door as the top of the door, and it's nice and even. There's no banding in it or anything like that, and it really is one of those colours with candy that you really do need to take your time, set yourself up for success. Don't try and rush the job. You know, I purposely made sure that this car was prepped so I could paint this on a weekend, so I could take my time with it. Now, I think on this particular day we got in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and me and Kerry both left around about 7 o'clock in the evening. So by the time we'd done any final little bits of tweaking on the prep, we triple checked all the masking, give the booth a last clean, given the car a few cleans. We then literally spread this job out over the day, and especially with me being ill, it really did sort of knock me back trying to paint this car. Hence another reason why it's handy to have Kerry there, so we could take over a few coats of the ground coat, and he was also doing the candy on the bumpers as well, which gave me a bit of a break and a bit of a rest, because not even halfway around this first coat of candy and I was absolutely dripping sweat, and it's not exactly hot here in the UK at the moment, but when you're in the booth and you've got your mask on and you've got spray suit and everything on, it really does take it out of you sometimes, especially on a big job like this. You know, we've put 3 coats of ground coat down, we're then going to put 3 coats of candy down, and then we're going to put 2 full wet coats of clear. That's a lot of time in the booth. So we left quite decent flash off times between each coat to give us a bit of a break and a bit of breather before we went back in. We could get a bit of water and refuel and then go back in and put the next coat on. And it gave each coat a nice amount of time to tack off, so that when we went back into the booth we could go in and tack it off between every coat to try and keep it as clean as we could as well. Plus, obviously, the kind of car that this is, and obviously being a candy red paint job as well, it can be quite mentally tasking on you as well, which wears you down quite quick because you're concentrating so much all the time on making sure you've got that nice even overlap. As you can see, Kerry's walking around in the booth keeping the airline out of the way for me, because the last thing that we need is the airline flicking up and catching apart the car, because then, you know, it's almost going to be starting from ground zero again, because we're going to end up with an issue in the candy. And you know, if you've started painting this and then you start with an issue in the candy, it's very, very hard to put the smallest issue right. You can't just, you know, nib it off and blow it in as if you're doing a silver respray or a standard coloured respray, because you've got the ground coat to go to again, and then you've got to bring the candy up to the same level without building it up too much in one area to another. So, you know, you do need it mentally. It can be quite tasking as well as physically when you're spending this much time in the booth. But at the same time, you know, one thing that I will say is this was one very, very rewarding car to spray. Part 2 should be up later in the week, so you can see the finished article when it was all done and rebuilt and polished. And I think you'll agree, you know, it's well worth the hours that you put into a car like this. When you see it done, the job satisfaction on a car like this is, you know, unreal. And to be quite honest with you, I love the job satisfaction in this job. I always have, especially on a car like this. Candy's not something that I do very often. And I know the very first candy job that I did, I didn't get it right the first time, a very, very, very long time ago, but most of that was down to stress. I went in there, I didn't have the right kind of frame of mind on me to be spraying it. I just kind of went at it like a normal job, and I was overthinking it too much. I think sometimes you really can overthink a job, and overthinking a job a lot of the time is just as bad as not thinking enough. And I know that might sound mad to some of you sort of DIY guys out there, that, you know, like, well, you know, a job like this you would want to overthink it, but you really don't. Because if you can paint a car, you can paint a car. And I know that kind of will sound baffling in a way, but just because it's a high-end car, it's a prestige car, or it's a supercar, it's the processes, the clear coat, the base coat, it's no different to any other car we paint. And in a way, without it sounding bad, obviously with this being an 80 100,000 pound car, that's the way that you need to approach it in your mind. It is a car that you are putting paint on. It is not a 100 grand car. It is not a 10 grand Fiesta, or a 100,000 pound Bentley or a 100,000 pound McLaren. It is a car that you are putting paint on. If you can do it on a 10 grand car, you can do it on a 100,000 pound car. And a lot of that comes down to believing in yourself more than anything. And you may get people that say to you that, oh no, you cannot do that. Well, I hate to say it, but if you can do it on a 10 grand car, you can do it on a 100 grand car. And it all comes down more to your mindset more than anything else. And like I said at the start, setting yourself up for success. So if you come late in the day to paint a car like this, don't do it. Go home, have a slightly early knockoff. Go home and out half an hour earlier, or tidy the workshop up and clean your guns out ready for the next day, and then come in the next day with a fresh head, and then you come and paint a car like this. You never do a car like this when you're stressed or you're overthinking it, because you are setting yourself up to fail, as mad as that might sound. So I hope you guys have enjoyed part 1 on this video. In part 2, we're going to take over from this coat of candy. We're going to finish the candy off, and then we're going to go through the clear coat stage, and we'll get a real nice good walk around of this car when this job's finished. That's it for me for today, guys, and I'll see you again soon in the next video. Bye for now.